Assyrian Foundation of America was established in 1964 as a 501c3 nonprofit in California to help needy Assyrians around the world support Assyrian education and preserve and promote the Assyrian language and culture. Since 1977, Nimbe magazine has been published under the auspices of the Assyrian Foundation of America and distributed around the world. Every day since inception, Assyrian Foundation of America has been a window of hope to keep Assyria alive. For more info, please visit AssyrianFoundation.org.
سلام عليكم. شانتيتون الخخورزة خاتا من اليوداعد شاميرام. وديو إيوغ يغدع عبودوتات شتست آتورات أمريكا Assyrian Foundation of America قد بشت لموريستا بمدينة سان فرانسيسكو يغدعنت كاليفورنيا. اديو معها عبودوتا بشت لموريستا بود طيانتد منتا من هدامت شتست آتورات أمريكا. جدعها عبودوتا هرب إدانا إيتن غدع ملالة رشمت دهرام شقد إلى ميقورتا ناديا يونان قد إلى أسكولات Ph.D وديو بدهم زمقاتا بدها قريانات إلى شيتا خارطة وبشت لسنتا بيد شتستا آتورات أمريكا اتلي هيفي مبسميتون بدها خرزة. يشخان المغرب بعدية إلى أمان ميقرأ سرغان شاباس قديلة تجبران شتستا آتورات أمريكا ميقرأ سرغان شلام عليكم.
شانا باسم ترابة قديت بقتم ترابة باسمة شميرة ميديا هيورا الله
روا بغداي غداي أخيتا إيوخ لخا خاودوتا موريستون قد ينتد منتا من هدامت شتستا آتورات أمريكا نبرسوبت قد كزبنا إيد هيورنا وينا هدام يوم تخدك ماشن داور كم سيدون خدش بوزادة تانيتون بدها أودوتا
اخنا الشتائيت خايا مشتوتة شو دخلة إيش دخلوا هداما قد طنخ منتا منه وآتي شرتشي شوية وخمية خمزمانة يعني تانا خدنا إليتي اخنا هو يرخ بقريطة اخديو رمشة ميقرطة نادية هو يرخ education ديوت إلى بقراء ميوزيكا إتا تشي تايمي خا مندن أو تانخ مندن تخسني دقاتي جو خرزت شو تابود ديان
بدها أورخانيز they're giving back شتست آتورات أمريكا.
إيه أخنا بسبارخ أخنا هيرخلون قد أني أسبر يبي قاتن هيرتا قبل أمتن أبي سندانة الخرزة دني أمتن بخيل تالا أختانخ باتن مخوريلا جو دوني شله.
باسيمة رابا ميقرأ سرغان عبيتون باسيمة خاودوتا رابا شابر تموريزتون بخيلت على هم ماشا عبيتون منتيانة
باسم ترابا مريم وباسيمة قم يقرأ ستيف تيلي بجراشة شكل أديو اتمجت همون بخا مشتو ترابا سباي ادي بخزيت من الخرزة ديو يرمشا بخيلت على مغزيت من القاتن جو خرزوغ ديوخن
إما
باسيمة رابا خزيانة مغبة هماشا سنديت شتست آتورات أمريكا اخنا هماشا هيرخ ناش سنيقة أسجلاية يوي بيشكل درجة الله بقريتها
وبقى يودع رابا هو يرتون اخنا ينتد منتا من ناخن قد قيودع شامي رمز يوم تخد كماشن داوا رابا كزبنا عيد بيتون هيران قد خرزن ما يخلن اليتو تعبيتون باسيم رابا
يدع رابا نخيتلا عويلا وقد مغزيخ مخوادة موادخ رابا يعني أوديات وادخ أخنوخن دا رخديوخن ماصيد بس بقيتنا بني أمتن باسم ترابة مريم
أختنا عبيتون باسيم يشخان مغب بعديا إلى أمان جاك تشار بخشي قد إلى تجبران education committee شتست آتورات أمريكا Assyrian Foundation of America شلام أغم يقرأ جاك؟
شلام مني شينت انتيه
باسيم رابا شابرتا أبودوتا مريزتون لخا أنا بين أبقدي وقبل مشان أخداك أخي تاليو داعت شاميرام
باسم ترابا باسم تاختوخن تيتون لخا والريكورد بعدتنا خرزة
هل بدأ أبودوتا بشتلا مريستا كلا نعيد بيد Assyrian Foundation of America إنا ملالة رشمت دهرام شقت إلى ميقورتا ناديا يونان بشتلا هويرتا بيد education committee قد أعتن إيفت تجبرانو قامودي برشلوخن أديو ناديا يونان أتي همزم ما يدعها أبودوتا قد إلى قد ينتد منتا من هدامت شتستا
ميقورتا ناديا يونان إلى خامن اسكولاي شارير ين بقرايلا PhD دكتوراه بشكالولا واشيتي إلى شيتو خارطة graduate بايلا من تورونتو كندا سو اخنا بريشالا من طلبنا منه خاما دانوتا يبا چون اخنا هم مشت سنيدوخ بقريتو بيولبانو وبيلان شمخ بس شولو بس خرزت بعدولا مقريتلا وعيم شركال منن ومن ديت يولبانو لبتله
أبيتم باسيم رابا ميقرأ جاك هل بديو متخدها خورزة ميقرأ ناديا يونان بت شميتون لا همزمتو أبيتم باسيم مقداجا خيتا قدها أبودو ترابا شابرتا هرب إدانا education committee فيتلا سندنتا قيوداعت شميرا مقبل خانة يوداعت شميرا مثلا تيانتد من تامن نوخن
باسيم أختوخن باسيم كتيتوخن
كشخانا المغبة ملالا رشمت ده رمشا إلى ميقرتا ناديا يونانت إلى PhD student من كندا تورونتو كندا أخ متخرم يقرأ جاك ودي بتهمزم قطعا بدها قرأته وبوسايد بتلاقى قريانة PhD. Hello Nadia.
Assalam alaikum, Mariam. Thank you for taking a few moments to speak with me.
Of course, thank you. Welcome again to Yudaat Shamiram. You were one of the first guests in 2017 that appeared on Yudaat Shamiram. It's been almost 5 years. Welcome back.
Thank you. Basim Tarava.
I know pandemic has slowed down your studies and this is your last year. Can you tell us a little bit about how things are going for you and what stage of your studies are you in and when are you graduating?
Yeah, so the first time that we met, I was in the fieldwork stages of my dissertation. So I was collecting data here in California, doing interviews. So now I've written my thesis, the dissertation is complete, and I'm in the editing stages. So I'm planning to submit a full draft to my PhD supervisor in December, and then I'm aiming for a defense in winter or early spring 2023.
That's great. I don't want you to reveal too much because you are going to record your lecture today. What are you mainly going to talk about?
So I'm very grateful to the Assyrian Foundation of America because they've actually supported me twice in my doctoral studies. First while I was doing fieldwork and now as I'm going into my last year. So I was trying to decide, what should I talk about tonight? And since they've supported me in my thesis work, I wanted to share with them a few pieces from my dissertation. So tonight I'm going to be presenting some excerpts from my dissertation material. So some tidbits, some examples from my dissertation.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Best of luck to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you.
Shalom alaikum neumtan mughibbe. Rawa bugdayan tiyitun lakha aman ke da khurza shapiret Foundation Shuritula ahayle nomiret ucha yani uchashin bara baruida levi and khurza Members Appreciation Night. So بيشتغل طلب تمني چون که هدامه خين زيت لانو نخرايت لان لخا بيشتغل طلب تمني كله بإنجلس هم زمنا كاتوخن. Ladies and gentlemen, guests and honorary guests, welcome. Welcome to our 9th annual Members Appreciation Night. Of course, actually, I was corrected that this is our 11th Members Appreciation Night, but because of COVID, we took 2 years off. So it was a legit excuse. So anyway, welcome. And this particular event of member appreciation is focused mostly on education branch of the foundation. And as you know, some of you might know me or not, I'm Jack Charbakshi. I'm a chairperson for Education and Cultural Committee of Foundation. And I was asked to do not only the MCF tonight, but also present some of the activities that we have. We are very thankful to many of you guys as a member of the foundation who has supported our pillars of education, culture, welfare, humanitarian, and our Nimble magazine. These are the ways that we actually show our work to our Assyrian community, local and abroad, actually nationally. tonight we will do some recognition of our valued members, and then we will introduce 2022 scholarship recipients, and then we will announce our special projects that we are working on, and it's in process. Then I will introduce our guest speaker, and she will be giving her presentation. And then at the end of her presentation, we'll allow you guys to do up to 15 minutes Q&A session with her if you have any questions. Otherwise, we will move on. We have a special thanks with Shamiram Media that they're here to record this wonderful event. And we are also thankful for DJ Rahman from Epic Music Entertainment that he's here. Of course, after the presentation tonight by Nadia, we will have dinner, and then we'll do some dancing. That's why we got DJs. So you guys get ready for that special event. Okay. I just wanted to say thank you for all those who specifically contribute to education funds. A special thank you goes to Martin Jacob family for their generous donation to Education Fund in memory of their granddaughter, Lily Jacob. Truly, honestly, without your help, without your donations to education funds, a lot of these will not happen. So we are thankful for what you're doing. And we are open definitely for some more. So with having said that, last year our scholars, the ones that we supported, some of them are this year. Last year we only had like five graduates, scholars that they were going for higher credentials, like for master and doctorate degrees or PhDs. And this year, here's a surprise, we got 10 educators, 10 scholars. Mr. Ronnie Ramya, he's a PhD candidate in education in Semitic language from Berlin, Germany. Ms. Nadia Younan, she's our guest speaker tonight. She is a PhD candidate for ethnomusicology from Ontario, Canada. Mr. Sabri Atman, he's a PhD candidate in history. He's in Texas, US. Mr. Samuel Yousefi, he's a PhD candidate in engineering, mechanical. He's also in Vancouver, Canada. Mr. Lawrence Nader, he's a Master of Arts candidate in Assyrian history. He's from Duhok, Iraq. Mr. Joseph Hermes, he is a PhD candidate in education from Illinois, Chicago, Illinois, in the US. Ryan Nazari, he's a Master of Art in philosophy. He's actually started his first year in Oxford, United Kingdom. Ms. Talita Bektas, she's getting her MS in dentistry her last year from Istanbul, Turkey. Mr. Shibla Betshamuel, he's a Master of Arts candidate in English Literature from Chicago, Illinois. And lastly, Ms. Nahreen Bektas, she's studying Bachelor of Arts in International Relations in Aydin, Turkey. So you see how important is your donation towards Education Fund, because mostly we focus on the folks that they are abroad and they're internationals. So the funding over there is with a very small amount that we can contribute to their funding, they can study a whole year. So that's why it's very important for us to recognize them and help them out, and in turn they become scholars. They do all kinds of activities for our Assyrian communities or at large nationwide. Our special project that I was talking about is Mr. Thomas Isaac with Nineveh Press. Thomas grew up in Sweden, and now he lives in Netherlands with his wife Miriam and his son Arthur. He studied Syriac at the St. Gabriel Seminary and in Turabdin at Uppsala University, and also he's a graphic design at the School of Communication in Stockholm. He's a freelance graphic designer, and he publishes books through his Nineveh Press organization. Nineveh Press is a publishing house specialized in publishing books about Assyrian history, culture, and language. His latest project that he's been working on for the last 2 years, and we've been supporting it in a couple of years ago. He kind of took break during pandemic time frame. Now he's continued, and he's almost finished with it. His project is called Paradise of Eden. The Paradise of Eden is the poetic title that Mar Abdishu Barbricha gave to his famous collection of 50 poems on religious subject composed in the style known as Magamat. The original book consists of 50 poems or memre with explanations by the author, a biography of the author, and instruction by the late Patriarch Mar Binyamin Shuman and Reverend De Kalita. The project scope, the layers are transcription of work, proofreading it, design of the work, printing, publishing, and distribution. And all these, each section or each cycle of work takes a lot of times and a lot of expenses to cover. So we have not been able to cover all his expenses, but every year we have been supporting him towards this project. And part of your contribution this year, if you want to specifically assign it for Education Committee to Thomas Isaac, please make a note to do so. Okay, now is the time for me to introduce to you our guest speaker, Ms. Nadia Younan. She's from Toronto, Canada. I'm going to give you her brief bio. Nadia Younan is a PhD candidate in ethnomusicology at the University of Toronto. Her doctoral research, funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, investigates intersection of collective memory, trauma, and resilience in Assyrian popular music and dance expressions. For her project, she has conducted extensive ethnographic field work among the Assyrian diaspora community in Canada and United States. In 2019, her first article entitled Stateless Rhythms, Transnational Steps, Embodying the Assyrian Nation Through Sheikhani Song and Dance, was published in the European Review of International Migration. Nadia has presented her work on Assyrian expressive culture at international conferences for organizations such as the Middle East Studies Association, the Society of Ethnomusicology, the International Association for the Study of Popular Music, and the American Anthropological Association. Her thesis defense is this forthcoming winter in 2023. Please join me to welcome Ms. Nadia Younan.
Shalom Aleichem, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for your presence tonight. I would like to start this presentation by offering my most sincere thank you to the Assyrian Foundation of America for supporting my doctoral research. I have been fortunate to have the support of AFA at two critical points in my PhD. First, when I was conducting fieldwork, which served as the foundation of this project, and now, as I am in my final year, editing my thesis and preparing to defend in winter 2023. After some deliberation about what to present this evening, I thought, since the scholarships from AFA have helped to support my thesis writing, I would like to share with you some excerpts from my dissertation. I will begin my presentation with a brief discussion of the scope of my research and then continue with the chapter excerpts. And I'll be focusing on the songs tonight, Yaneshet Chome and Bet Naharen, to give you an idea of how I talk about other songs and Assyrian music and dance more generally in my dissertation. So just as oftentimes there's a little bit of confusion about what I do because it's music, but it's also research. And so I'm in the field of ethnomusicology, which is the study of music in or as culture. So it's kind of, if you would imagine, a mix of music and anthropology. So my work moves between musical analysis and cultural analysis. My dissertation is a study on the connections between cultural trauma and collective memory in popular Assyrian music and dance. Through my personal and ethnographic experiences as both a member of and researcher in the Assyrian community, I aim to understand more precisely how trauma manifests at a cultural level and is positioned in constructions of Assyrian identity and memory. For example, I have found that discussions about recent hardships, such as the invasion of ISIS in spring 2014 and the American occupation of Iraq in 2003, are often linked with past sufferings, going sometimes as far back as the 1915 Assyrian genocide. To me, this suggests how we rethink collective memories in reforming Assyrian identity under our present conditions of mass dispersal and diaspora. As a modality for expressing Assyrian identity, music is a meaningful site from which collective memory is reconstructed and through which trauma may be assuaged, worked through, or given testimony. Music is a significant mediator and form of representation in these processes. As mediator, music is an aesthetic dimension of representation. So I propose a synthesis of memory, trauma, and community resilience as a framework from how to investigate how music mediates and represents our contemporary experiences as Assyrians. So in my dissertation, I ask the following questions. How have music and dance been used for communicating the history of Assyrians when it's often absent in state histories, scholarly literature, or mainstream media? When physical place is not tenable as the foundation for group identity, why and with what understandings do Assyrians in diaspora turn to music and dance as sites for expressing or even contesting their collective identity? And how can the expressive culture of the Assyrian community replace or rebuild what has been lost? What purposes do music and dance serve for reconstructing identity under circumstances of mass dispersal and displacement? So these are my research questions directly from my dissertation. So though I don't claim that music and dance are an absolute remedy, what I am trying to say is that music and dance practices have the potential to construct and communicate collective memories and to be part of the process by which traumatic experience is testified and worked through. In these acts of reconstruction and recovery of meaning, space opens for the expression of individual and community resilience. And I put a lot of what I'm saying on slides, especially quotes from my research participants. I'm a very visual person. I find that it helps to have something to follow along with. So a little bit about me, because how you position yourself in your research is very important in my field. I was born in Toronto, Ontario, to mixed heritage. My mother is a second-generation Italian-Canadian whose parents immigrated to Canada from a small town in central Italy post-World War II. My father is a first-generation Assyrian Iraqi who was born in Mosul, Iraq, and raised in Baghdad. He came with his family to Toronto in 1969. I acknowledge that my project has been often based on this shared heritage with my research participants, and that my experience as an Assyrian has encouraged a constant and consistent reflexiveness, so thinking about what challenges and informs my own assumptions about Assyrian culture and community formation. So from a logistical point, my position has also made it feasible to conduct multi-sited fieldwork in very short time frames. So just a little bit about my fieldwork process. I conducted interviews and I participated and made notes, for example, at a variety of community events, and it was multi-sited. So these are my research sites: Toronto, Chicago, San Jose, Phoenix, Scottsdale, and Warren, Michigan. And it's really great to be back in California for the first time since before COVID. Okay. On Saturday, December 19, 2015, the Center for Canadian-Assyrian Relations presented the concert Christmas in Assyria at the Rose Theatre in Brampton, Ontario. It was a variety show consisting of several solo performers and a folk dance group. Part of the show's goal was to raise money for the Assyrian Aid Society and the Assyrian Church of the East Relief Organization in Iraq, both of whom were helping Assyrians internally displaced due to the unfolding situation with ISIS. Amongst the soloists of the show was Toronto-based Assyrian artist Stella Rezgo, if anybody's familiar with her. Stella immigrated to Canada from Russia, where she grew up. She explained to me that her family fled to Georgia and subsequently Russia following the 1915 Assyrian genocide, henceforth SAFO, and they have never returned to their hometowns. For the Christmas concert, Stella performed a rendition of Yanishet Kome, and I'd like to attempt to play a short clip of it. After this performance, and that's actually me playing saxophone in the background, I had the opportunity to interview Stella, and I asked her why she chose to perform this piece at a Christmas concert. So first she mentioned that the previous summer she had seen the film A Man Before His Time about Dr. Freydun Oturaya, which also made reference to this piece. But then Stella also told me, I always loved this song and I never had the chance to sing it, so I kind of decided that I will perform that song at the concert. I know that a lot of people, they know this song and they love this song. She also spoke about the beauty of the melody and how she thought that this could be one of the reasons about why the song has been passed down through generations. But then she more specifically replied, history repeats itself, and that's why this song is still actual, because this never ends. And in 2014, 2015 were the worst years for Assyrian people because of ISIS, and we did not see that happening. We did not see that coming. We thought the worst is in the past, but apparently not. It just kind of fills your heart with all the, grief and stuff, and we can't forget that because it happened in the past, it's happening now. We're still living through it, In her description of why she chose to perform Yanishet Kome, Stella makes this connection between the continued performance of the piece and the continued persecution of Assyrians in their homeland. Part of the proceeds were donated to the Assyrian Church of the East Relief Organization, as I mentioned. And at the time, Asero was in the process of building a refugee camp named Camp Sauda for internally displaced Assyrians in northern Iraq. I distinctly recall during rehearsal when Stella told me, oh, Nadia, can you add some ornamentation at the end of my lines, but then just make sure you come to like a really silent end. And I remember thinking in these silent moments of rehearsal, how painfully ironic it was that in a Christmas concert in 2015, We were raising money for the building of refugee camps in the same area where Assyrians had been refugees 100 years ago fleeing Sefo, also in the same region as Semele, the site of the 1933 Semele massacre. Because as Stella said to me, we're still living through it. So why Yanishet Khome? A few different reasons. So for me, a case study on this song offers an approach to genocide discourse in our community that then makes a place for expressive culture and broader discussions of cultural trauma. So my rationale for examining Yanishet Khome is based on a few things. First, when I'm going to talk about this, the origins and the composition of the original poem into a song happened in the context of Sefo and the 1933 Semele massacre. And secondly, I think that the continued performance of this song nearly a century after its initial composition also mirrors in some way or parallels this discourse of continued genocide. The surrounding connotation of reverence, or how this song is performed so often and cared about, I think is partially attributable to the somewhat legendary status of the poem's author, Freydun Aturaya. The popularity of the song and the undertones of nationalism that have come up in discussions and performances of the piece reflect the story of Freydun Aturaya himself, and this might be familiar to some of you. Born in Urmi in 1891, he spent his childhood with his maternal family in Tbilisi. He graduated as a medical doctor from the University of Saratog and graduated in 1915. Stories about Freydun Aturaya circulate from this general time period, which coincides with World War I and the 1915 Assyrian genocide, or Sefo, as well as his involvement in the Russian military and his contributions to print literature, so newspapers, journals, magazines, in the rise of our early Assyrian nationalist movement. So some of his writings include, as you may know, the Urmiya Manifesto of the United Free Assyria. He also wrote in a newspaper called Kekwa, which was a nationalist newspaper established in 1906 in Urmiya, Iran, by a group of Assyrians who were educated at the American Presbyterian Mission. So in addition to his Assyrian political pursuits, Freydun Aturaya was appointed as a doctor in the Russian army. So he volunteered to go to the Caucasian front as an army physician. During his military service, it's said that he assisted in the formation of refugee special committee groups through which thousands of Assyrians fled from the genocide to the Transcaucasus by way of this Red Cross-assisted working committee. So through his military experience, he would have been further exposed to these indignities experienced by the Assyrians, which may have even further contributed to his work for the Assyrian national cause. Shortly after the war, Freydun Aturaya was wrongfully arrested and he died in prison. His imprisonment and untimely death directly correlate to the composition of Yanishet Khome. It is believed that he wrote the poem while in prison. As Sargis Michael writes in his biographical interpretation of Freydun Aturaya, and I would actually just note that this quote is from Nineveh magazine, which is an AFA publication, his only crime was that he openly and honestly worked for a national home for his Assyrian people. In prison, he composed Yanishet Khome, and in this song, one sees his noble soul desperately fluttering against the dark prison walls. Then his soul is free. He imagines he is flying on the wings of an eagle to see for the last time his beloved Assyrian nation, in Taqoma and Tiari, Min Urmil Mosul, Barwari. Then he is flying to Nineveh. Freydun Aturaya was a physician, scholar, and early activist for Assyrian nationalism. He is not immediately associated with, this figure of the bold, warlike man that's portrayed in Yanishet Khome. However, he is viewed as somebody who self-sacrificed for his Assyrian nation. And I think it is his own life as much as the story of the Assyrian peoples that is reflected in this song. Although Yanishet Khome began as a poem, my experience with the song has actually been mostly through various performances and conversations where it was discussed, but mostly around the poem as a song. And I found it was interesting that although it was first performed to music by Syrian artist Jibrail Said, it was continuously attributed to Freydun Aturaya, who actually would have never heard it performed as a song. The story of Freydun Aturaya, the time period in which it was written, and the rich symbolism of the poem have certainly made it clear the significance for the Assyrian community. But I would argue, and maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm coming from a music background, that it's the setting of the poem to music that has contributed to its long-standing popularity. Jibril Said was also an Assyrian political activist. He was born in 1914, Urmia, Iran, which positions his early life in the midst of the genocide period in World War I. In 1952, his political activities earned him an elected post in the First Assyrian National Committee in Tehran. In his later life, he left Iran and joined his family in California as part of the Assyrian diaspora. In relation to Yanishet Khome, Sayed is significantly noteworthy. He set the poem to music and recorded the piece in 1934 as a response to the 1933 Samel massacre in Iraq. So some of you may have heard this, but just in case you haven't, I wanted to play a little excerpt of the original recording of Yanishet Khome as a song. This is another quote from Nineveh magazine. Actually, Nineveh magazine was very helpful in writing this chapter. In the Assyrian community in Iraq, one voice was heard above all others during the 1930s. Jibril was only a teenager when he was overwhelmed by the news of the 1933 Samel massacre of Assyrians at the hands of Iraqi military factions. Jibril's patriotism didn't drive him to take arms against the persecutors of his people, yet his choice of weapon was more powerful. The words and songs he chose united and compelled the Assyrian community in Iraq to survive the regime's merciless persecution of his people. He dared to raise his rich tenor voice on stage, and finally, in recordings of 10 songs, including 4 very patriotic songs written by famous composers, such as Dr. Feridun Atraya, this is referring to Yanishet Khome. So, Jibril Sayed's original 1934 recording of Yanishet Khome directly connects the song to Assyrian narratives of persecution, continuous genocide, and as a song that is performed repeatedly and intergenerationally, so, through different generations, the song performs an active role in bringing individual experiences of traumatic circumstances into the Assyrian cultural sphere. I position Yanishet Khome as a popular song in Assyrian music repertoire. It's part of a particular body of pop music that we can think about as our nationalistic songs. But I've also heard the piece referred to as a folk song. I think that's because there's just general knowledge in the community about the age and the song and the poem. The original composition is accompanied by violin and piano, with more recent versions using various orchestrations, such as the one we saw with Stella. These are not considered traditional instruments in Assyrian music, but where the song does present some elements of Assyrian folk music are meter and mode. And since this is a music presentation, in case there are a few music people in the audience, I just wanted to make a couple musical notes. The song is in a 6/8 meter. This is common in traditional line dances such as khidga. It's composed in a minor key, and the range of the melody is primarily within the tonic and dominant degrees. So that type of tone of the piece and the range of how he's singing is similar to liturgical hymns from the Aramaic church. The song briefly transitions to a different key in measures 9 through 12, and it reaches a peak on the words Salan and Shlama, prayer and peace. which maybe we can think about this as a song that is a prayer in itself for peace, given the uncertainty experienced by both Freydun Atoraya, but also the multiple episodes of persecution that our Assyrian community reflects in this continued performance of the song. Also, during the interviews, that I had a lot of them, the first part of the song was actually focused on more than the second part. And it's in this part that he refers to Assyrian towns and villages. There's also reference to Nineveh, the capital of the ancient Assyrian Empire. And then he also then refers to Atur Atikta, ancient Assyria. So the author is mapping the geographical region of an Assyrian nation by connecting modern and historical places of being. This idea of drawing borders is also suggested in the title of the piece, where the plural word techome comes from the root techom, so it would be ta chet mim, which means to limit, define, or to border. The constructions of borders in this song produces this landscape from which, as Assyrians in the diaspora, we can think about our homeland and our history. Several people I spoke with expressed similar feelings about this. So, for example, in a conversation with Nardine, a young Assyrian man who I interviewed here in California, I asked if he had any thoughts about the significance of music for a community that is so widely spread apart in diaspora. And then this is a part of our conversation. He said, "Music is one of the few things that unites us, right? I think that music, in one of the ways that we tell our story to each other, it taught me history. In our songs especially, we name a lot of villages, we name a lot of churches and sites, and especially as kids in diaspora from countries that are so hard to access, we don't necessarily know a lot of that. We don't get a history class, and our parents don't always have time to sit there and tell us everything about everything they experienced in the homeland. So I think our songs are so important in a community that is spread out because it helps us to tell our story to each other. Sometimes it's nice to just tell your story to your own community. It's important." So then after he said all this, I said, "Oh yeah, okay, well, do you have any songs that come to mind when you think about this?" And he answered right away, yes, songs like Inishat Home. When he sings about the Assyrian triangle, that's how I learned about that. I learned about that through music. And then I said, well, what was the triangle that he mentioned? And Nardine said, he mentions Urmi and Mosul and everything else that falls in between. I think even Freydun Atoraya coined that, the Assyrian triangle. And then I learned about that through music. And then I made a little map diagram to try to actually put together this Assyrian triangle from the song, but also that Nardine was talking about. Nardine's understanding of this Assyrian geography was expressed to me by other people as well. So in June 2018, I attended the first Assyrian National Policy Conference in Washington, D.C. Wilfred Bet Alkhas, who is one of my contacts here in San Jose, presented the lecture, The Murder of Mar Binyamin Shimon and the Secularization of the Assyrian Question. So during his presentation, Wilfred discussed the murder of Mar Binyamin Shimon as a turning point, potential turning point in Assyrian national discussion, where there was talk about shifting power relations from the church to a more secular authority. But what was interesting to me at this presentation about church and politics at a policy conference in Washington, D.C., was that he actually started to talk about the song Yenishet Home. And then he talked about how it's a song that contributed to the construction of early Assyrian nationalism. So following the conference, I emailed Wilfred and I asked if he would also be willing to share a bit about his family's story and what he thought about the song. And this is what he said to me. He said, let's start with the Yenishet Home song. The title of the song has double meaning. Freydun Atoraya was very careful in how he used the term Tchome because it's not just the spelling but also the meaning. The song is often performed using the word Tchoma, and most people believe he is referring to the tribe of Tchoma, but there is also the Assyrian word for the borders, which is exactly the same, Tchome, and these come from the same root. Is Atoraya referring to the eagle over the borders, or the eagle of Tchoma? He is actually using it interchangeably. If you listen to the lyrics, Atoraya's eagle takes flight from Tchoma and follows this path, Tchoma, Tiari, Ormia, Mosul, Barwar, Nineveh, and back. Aturaya's eagle starts from Tchome and flies in this clockwise motion over the Tchome borders or the limits of the Assyria that Aturaya imagines in his head. The first path takes him over the Hakkari region, and in the second circle he flies over the plain of Urmi and the plain of Mosul, Dasht al-Ninweh, in Iraq. He then takes another flight over the Jazeera to come back to Tchome and the river Zab. Herein, he skillfully draws the borders of Assyria he envisions in the 1920s. Simply brilliant. And then he mentioned, I was born in Tehran, my family fled in 1979, and we never went back. I just make that point because these stories were very common in a lot of my interviews. In a present context, the use of specific place names in Yanisha Tchome documents the presence of Assyrians in places where their presence has been significantly marginalized or in some cases erased. So these places, Tiari, Barwar, Urmi, Mosul, Nineveh, are where and what for the brave warrior of the song sacrificed himself. But they are also the places that shaped Nardine's imagination of Fredun Aturaya's Assyrian triangle, and they are the places to which Wilfrid, whose story is the story of many Assyrians, never went back. Okay, a little bit about the eagle. So the eagle is the title character in the song, and during my fieldwork, I developed a pretty good network of Assyrians in Canada and the United States on Facebook. So I decided, I wonder if I just ask people on Facebook what they think about this, what they'll say. So on May 15th, 2018, this is what I posted. I said, hey Assyrians, ever notice that a lot of our songs mention Anishra? And I also mentioned Prochlama. Does anyone know the meaning or history of the eagle as an Assyrian symbol? Please message or send links. Thanks. #FlyHigh. This particular post brought references to ancient Assyrian symbols, particularly the close linguistic affiliation to Nisroch, a deity in the Assyrian pantheon, which is the first symbol. There was also a connection made to the Assyrian god Ashur. Ashur is the head of the Assyrian pantheon, depicted against a solar disk with the wings of an eagle. And then reference was also made to Lamassu, a protective deity used by various Mesopotamian groups, including the Sumerians and the Assyrians. Lamassu is depicted as a composite of a bull, eagle, and human. The connection between the eagle and ancient Assyrian iconography, so ancient Assyrian visual symbols, to me is situated in this collective understanding we have of a shared Mesopotamian heritage, but it also comes up in the song itself when he talks about Atur Atikta. So going back to Wilfrid's analysis, it seems the eagle, who flies from Urmi to Mosul, finally descending in Nineveh, is drawing borders through its flight course, because it is, after all, the Nishat Chome, the eagle of borders. And I'd actually like to come back to Stella and her discussion and her choice to perform the song at the Christmas concert, because she also made reference to this movement of the eagle in her own understanding of the song. She said the song is about the eagle who is flying around, and just, it's an Umta song about our motherland. It's a tragic, sad kind of song, but at the same time reminding us who we are and where we're from. And that we have a piece of land somewhere we can call our motherland. So this is pretty much about that and about unity as well, I would say, because when the Nishra is flying around, he is kind of flying over each particular village or town or city, and he unites everybody under his wings. And I just thought that was really beautiful imagery. Stella's explanation summarizes a few of the points that I've been talking about. So first, she identifies the song as an Umta song, so positions it as this Assyrian national piece. Then she calls it a tragic, sad kind of song, but this could be referring to the circumstances in which Fredun Aturaya wrote the poem, but it could also be the context in which she was performing. And then in the end, the eagle is flying over these different places, uniting everyone under its wings. And although Stella is referring to the places described in the song, I would further extend this reading of the eagle, this understanding of the eagle, bringing people under its wings, the way that the continued performances of this song brings Assyrians in the diaspora together through music. And so that's an excerpt from one part of my dissertation. And now I'd like to actually flip over a bit to another excerpt. So this is from a section in my dissertation where I talk about finding the Assyrian in Assyrian music. And this was driven by a few questions I was thinking about. For example, what drives the identification of Assyrian popular songs when at first listen they share many musical attributes with a pan-Middle Eastern sound? And how do Assyrians ascribe value? How do they put value, if they do, to an Assyrian pop song? So although I had my own thoughts about how to answer these questions, I often ask during interviews people, what do you think makes an Assyrian song Assyrian? I initially assumed that responses would refer to certain musical characteristics, lyrical content, or language. And while lyrical content and language did come out as very important, I also became aware of these different levels of narrative that people shared in this process of finding the Assyrian in Assyrian music. And what I mean by that is that people were using the same words to describe music as they were to describe their personal or family circumstances of trauma, cultural trauma. So words like genocide, migration, home, nation, survival, these all came up while people were talking about music. So for this chapter, I thought, how does cultural trauma come up at the level of ethnic identity through ways in which how we as Assyrians also self-identify, how we think about identity through songs? And again, I know there are a lot of ways to think about this, but my background is in music, so this is focused on music. So in one personal narrative, one of my research participants, Steve, talked about his experience emigrating from Iran to the US and living in Europe for several years in between. So I asked Steve, because he told me this long story about everything that happened to him, so given all of these different and sometimes difficult life experiences, how or like what kind of music do you listen to, and why do you think music is important? So he replied, of course I listen to music. And singers that are doing the music videos or singing for this nation, because some Assyrians are born in the US or Europe, they keep the language alive because of listening to the music. So what I mean is the singer, music, it's one of the teachers for our language. To keep our nation as Assyrian, we keep our language. So then I asked, okay, well, is there any type of music in particular you like to listen to? And he said, I love all the Assyrian music, any style, doesn't matter, but I always love Ashubit Sargis because I believe we need the motivation music. The music that makes the blood bolden, the music that gives you hope. It's okay, we spend some sad times, but right now it's a movement. We need music to make the movement. More music that gives you hope and you say strong, and you think of that place you come from. Its name is Assyria. Discussions around Assyrian music, again, often move between language and lyrical content. So what I mean by that is not just the language that the song is being sung in, but what the lyrics are saying. What is the story of the song? But as somebody who's writing a dissertation, I can't just talk about these things. I have to theorize them. And so I had to decide, well, how can I put theory onto these casual discussions that I'm having with people? So one way that I think about it is to consider value. And I draw from a linguist by the name of Shahrazad Mahutian, who argues that the language of a community, whether it's a country, a state, is not necessarily neutral or accidental. We don't just speak the languages we speak for no reason sometimes. It can have both intrinsic and extrinsic value. So extrinsically, thinking external, is a choice that announces loudly and clearly that a community is officially a particular ethnicity. So very simply put, I'm Assyrian because I speak Assyrian. However, what I'm more interested in is the intrinsic value. Intrinsic value is a point from which to articulate the meaning that this music has for its listening public. Intrinsically, using this word, this theory from this person, the language that a bi or multilingual person chooses for certain communications can represent the individual and his or her ethnic blend, loyalties, and, in albeit a more romantical sense, their heart and soul. I draw from Mahutian for connections between this description because of the way that my research participants talked about language, which at times included direct references to the heart. So Assyrians are almost always at least bilingual. For example, in the homeland, Assyrians would have to speak a combination of Assyrian and Arabic, Kurdish, Turkish, or Farsi. Assyrian immigrants in other countries such as Canada and the United States may become trilingual, speaking, for example, Assyrian, Arabic, and English. Assyrians born in the diaspora may or may not speak various levels of Assyrian and their language of their country where they live. So despite this variety of language skills, consistent connections between language and musical definition in discussions with Assyrian community members to me suggests that Assyrian language lyrics holds meaning to individuals. So while in California, again, I have a lot of this was not intentional, but I have a lot of California in this presentation. While in California, I spoke with Alphonse, who emigrated from Iran to the United States. So I asked Alphonse for his thoughts on, what makes Assyrian music Assyrian? Again, my favorite question to ask. And he replied, the music changes influence from some kind of music that we can feel is influenced by Turkish, some by Arabic, some by Persian. But overall, when the lyrics are in Assyrian, even the lyrics satisfy you. They talk about events, about the love, about nature. Some songs are about the memories they have from their towns. So then I said, okay, well, how do you feel when you listen to Assyrian music? And he said, I feel great. I feel at home because my music is in my blood and I hear the lyrics, I feel them deeply. Although I know 5 languages, Azeri, Farsi, Assyrian, English, French, but when Assyrian song is there, it's different feelings. It comes from the heart and you remember your ancestors. You remember the good times that you had in the family. You remember your childhood and everything. And I would actually just add a personal note to this, thinking about how you feel when you listen to or you sing Assyrian music, because I didn't grow up speaking Assyrian, and I'm trying to learn now, later in my life. So I'm not fluent, but I can sing along to an Assyrian song, and that gives me a space to participate in how the language feels, because it is easier to memorize. It's easier to memorize things when put to music. That's why, as children, what do? We teach our children things through songs. They're ABCs, right? So just a little personal note, too, about feelings of connection between music and language. So I quote Alphonse because he directly communicates the value of both the language and the lyrical content, right? Because he's talking about the language, but he's also talking about what the songs are saying. He also clearly states that for all the languages that he knows, Assyrian feels different. I position this understanding of intrinsic value, again, this is the theory I'm using, because it allows for this consideration that has theory in it of the heart and soul, in tandem with these nationalistic loyalties and ethnic backgrounds. And this opens a space for considering how Assyrians, we ourselves, put value on language in Assyrian popular music. Separation from and memory of the homeland was also prominent in my conversation with Maureen, an Assyrian woman who I interviewed in Toronto. Maureen mentioned that her family had fled Iraq as refugees during the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. And I asked her if she'd be willing to share some of her experience with me. And she agreed. So Maureen was born in Iraq, and she was 5 years old when her family fled on both foot and horseback from Iraq to the UN refugee camps in Iran. From there, they would go on to spend several months in Syria and Greece, eventually settling in Canada. So parts of Maureen's narrative showed this play between feelings of resilience, Assyrian expressive culture, and this diaspora that we're in based on personal and collective experience. So one of the questions I asked Maureen, which maybe we're getting familiar with Nadia's research questions now, was, what kind of Assyrian music do you like to listen to? And she said, in my adolescent years, I became more drawn to Ashabit Sadgis. He is one of my favorite singers because of his nationalistic songs. His words just hit your soul, So again, we're talking about soul. His songs provide an emotional release of being separated from our ancestral homeland. For me personally, who has not been back to Assyria since we left, his songs provide a connection to the homeland. With everything going on in the world and the uncertainty for Assyrians who are subjected to human rights violations, displacement, execution, Asher's lyrics ignite passion, love, and hope for the Assyrian nation. Given these circumstances and the times, you can't help but feel every emotion when you sit and listen to his songs and the somber tone in his voice. You don't have to be born there to understand the struggles and hopes. So then I said, okay, well, can you kind of elaborate a little bit on what you mean by the times, or are there any particular Ashabit Sadgis songs that you think of that really evoke these types of emotions? And I'm really letting Maureen speak here. She said, I mean how we're just scattered living in the diaspora. The history of struggle and persecution continues to shape Assyrian identity today. Injustices are repeated throughout history. It's important to maintain cultural and traditional language, and music is an essential element of culture. It creates cultural identity. It's a vehicle for bringing communities together in unity. Bet Nahran, that's one of my favorites. Bet Nahran takes me back to that time when I was living in the homeland. As Ashur says, Bet Nahran atri wat leman shinnach, meaning, Assyria, you are my country, I will not forget you. I think for anyone living in the diaspora, this song is inspiring, universal, and relatable. He goes on to say, Dimmi bjari kul dakeka shemach dakhrin, meaning, I bleed every time I remember your name. No Assyrian patriotic playlist would be complete without this song. There is a depiction of hope, resiliency, and perseverance in his words. Assyrians, after everything they have endured, have a reputation for being resilient. My favorite verse of Bet Nahran is Khutrananach Kule Jame Bnunach Ubnatach, meaning, under your arms everyone is gathered, your sons and your daughters. There are a lot of Assyrian songs depicting the unbreakable bond with Assyria to which Assyrians long to return. What can be more powerful and moving than this? But I also thought it's interesting that she talks about coming together under the arms of the motherland, and this also ties into coming together under the wings of the Nishta. It's a little bit about the song, which I'm sure most people here know pretty well. So first of all, I think Bet Nahran is a testament to the longevity of Ashur Bet Sargis's career. The original version of the song was released on his first album, Ashur Sargis Sings for Bet Nahran, in 1972, but then was remade for his second album, Ashur Sargis Sings for Ancient Assyria, in 1975. So it's the second version that is I think the most popular, and which I'll be referring to. So while the original is comprised or made up only of the main song, the remake includes the introductory recitation, so the introduction, that mixes spoken and sung poetry. The lyrics and music are credited to Assyrian songwriter Benjamin Malko, but it's been my experience that when people mention this song, it's primarily associated with Ashur as the performer. So the song begins with a rubato poetic recitation. Take a little listen.
لمن شنخ يا بت نهرين دمي بجارة شو دقيقة شمخ تخرن وطن صوتا عتمو غبتي بيق بزمرن دردخ جوري بيومت موتي ودقني بطمرن خرابنا بكوشي وطن امديناتخ دمت خشا مجرويين المرغاتخ طول يومت ماطن الله خزن فاتخ خدرانانخ جميل شلي بدونخ بناتخ نسيب الطورة بيسقين جالن جياك جيخا بتمدنين بوتك أريال دماصريخا خيم ورون شنتت لالا لابن ميخا خيم ورون شنتت لالا لابن ميخا الخير تغيابت نهرين لبيخريخا الخير تغيابت نهرين لبيخريخا
tempo is slow, it's going slow. Asher's voice is gentle, it's sorrowful. But on the line 9, which I bolded here, the tone shifts, and Asher claims he's on the edge of the mountain like a rabid lion after a hunt, and he begins to sing. He increases his dynamics, so how loud or soft his voice is. And although he doesn't make it really loud, his voice becomes a little bit more assertive. The opening comes to a slow end, and there's a brief moment of silence before the song cuts into a drastically different second part that consists of this alternating between verse and chorus.
بتنهر النطيبات لي منشنا معروتات نخراي داخل شوقنا وعدو طائلة قد خيي بدوخنا وعدو طائلة قد خيي بدوخنا بتنهرين نطريبات بتنهرين نطريبات بتنهرين أرأخ اختب مشتنا إني زكايا جاني دو خبودنا المكاكا مايا قد ما سيخيبروني آتورايا قد ما سيخيبروني آتورايا بتنهرين نطريغات بتنهرين نطريغات بتنهرين.
So a little bit, again, just talk about music, because this is about music. So the guitar and accordion feature more prominently in the song, but this time they're accompanied by that driving tambourine sound. The tune continues in a minor key, but it changes from that looser rhythm of the introduction into this, what in music we call like an allegro cut time. Allegro is fast, so that type of is often associated with like marches, for example. So the tone completely shifts. So the introduction is a little bit melancholic, it's a little bit sad, but the verse and chorus comes in and it's saying, okay, well now it's time to do something about that sadness. So Asher sings about sacrifice. He's standing at the top of Nineveh with the sword in hand, but he also weeps as he's left his country in the hands of strangers. He admits that as his longing for Bet Naharan increases, his hope of returning decreases. However, still undeterred, he continues that he will find and cure what makes his homeland ail, and he's essentially singing to one beloved, as he mentions in the introduction at Mokhibti. In the final lyric of the song, Asher sings what's actually one of my personal favorite lines in Assyrian music, this metaphor comparing the sky above Bet Naharan to a quilt, his blanket, and the land to a pillow. And although this is a metaphor or symbolic, to me it can also represent the significance of Bet Naharan as being a place of true rest for an Assyrian. It's in the sphere of hope and pain that songs like Bet Naharan take place and drive the emotions of their listeners. Also, there's this blend again between ancient and contemporary Assyrians, where he's talking about places such as Nineveh, Bet Naharan, and Assyria that also connects to Yenishet Homet. And so not on a map, when you look at a map right now, like Google Maps, Assyria can move into the existence in songs and feelings of the Assyrian listener, of us as Assyrian listeners. And there can still be meaningful connection, maybe if not only in person, also through song. Just to tie Maureen and Steve together a bit, they both find meaning in this music of Asher Bissargis, like many Assyrians I spoke with. Maureen specifically talks about Bitnaharan as being motivating, hopeful, expressing that hope is part of surviving as an Assyrian. She also moves beyond despair by recognizing resilience in this continued performance of songs such as Bitnaharan and the way that it refers to Assyrian names, for example. Steve also talks about hope, connecting the feeling of hope to music that makes the blood bolden. So in addition to hope, Maureen and Steve make this connection to movement. For Maureen, feeling patriotic and pushing on resilience suggests this forward movement. But her comments connect with Steve's suggestion that music, especially songs like Bitnaharan, help the community to focus on motivation and movement in order to remember and to think about Assyria. So Bitnaharan is a story of separation and longing that comes to have meaning for its listeners through the emotions it evokes, from love and sadness to feeling bold and motivated. Hope of victory over difficult times is familiar in the Assyrian community, and perhaps it's a way for our diasporically separated community to also make sense of our current individual and community collective lives. While on fieldwork in Chicago, Illinois, I had the opportunity to interview Assyrian musician David Isha. David spoke a lot about his song Ya Akhuni, which I also talk about in my dissertation, and his arrest for the recording and performance of this popular nationalistic song. So in addition to this type of biographical information, I asked him, as I ask in my interviews, what his thoughts are on contemporary Assyrian music, what makes Assyrian music Assyrian, etc. And he said, "We need the music. It is the heart of our community. To be honest with you, music will keep us rolling forward. It will introduce us to other communities, to other nations too. People will know us from our music. They will know us from our songs." David claims that music, as the heart of the community, could be one way to introduce Assyrians to other nations and communities. The stories and feelings that are in Assyrian musical expressions are points from which people will know us from our music, from our songs. And although David said that this is how others would come to know Assyrians, it is my hope that this research also demonstrates that music is at the heart of our community because it is also part of how we come to know ourselves. And on a final note, I would like to dedicate my work in the memory of my grandparents, Shmael and Nadia Younan, who taught me the value of community, of hard work, and education. They have always been, for me, the best part of being Assyrian. Thank you, and Naram Shalchum Rika.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I hope you all enjoyed her presentation. It's fabulous. You got me emotional a little bit over there. Well, on behalf of the foundation, I really thank you for coming up here, and we have a small token of appreciation for your dedication to study Assyriology, or this is actually a studying of ethnomusic study is part of studying Assyriology. And music, like she said, it is part of our daily lives. Everybody listens to music. Some cheers us up, some makes us cry, some connects us to our roots. So thank you for your study, for your research. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
I think most of you are hungry, aren't you? Yes. All right. Well, it's time for us to have a meal. And before we start, Ms. Ellen, will you honor us to come over here and give us a word of prayer before we start our dinner, please?
قبل خون بشنا رابط داين قد بغزايا خوني وان خد فاتيا خون واتي يمشيخة ما كباقليشان بسلوطة وشاكر تقام حضورت مارن بابا بشمية شاكر خوا خدودي يوما قد منور خاطر رخقة وقربة مو يعني بد ممتو يعني بد سلامات قد خارم شباسي معويلن يو حضور قدشتا شاكر خون بود سلامات ويتان شاكر خوان قد إيدات الرحمن همشا الدا أمتنا على سوغل بألف شنو خم يعني بود نشانن خم يود يارباقون جيات الدنيا همشا أتويد آمانيا على سوغل شاكر خوان شبو خوان ياماريا سوغل بودن يخد فاتيا خم واتي بارخنو انقد لنا بشعاتي يا مار يسوع بارخنو انقد بشويت المرنا بارخنو ان عزيزت قد ميدا يوفخ قد كسلو غينا وديو يا مار يسوع من وقت لابن قد برخت لأرام شا برخت لأخوري قد موتيوت قاتن يا ماران من قلت أولول على خينا عدي ود نوشخ أترونو سختيبه عدلت لغ بارابر من قلت أولول أخنا كل تخبه خيان يعوخ قاتوخ كل شند خيان بتبايخلوخ من كل اللبن من كل روخان من كل خيلن ومن كل متقتلن على يسوجل كل نشمد مارن إشام شيخة بنوق سوجل كان منوق بطلابن شامتلي سبب أتقديان قم تبيلوخ أخنا بيعيخ وخ آمين
لشوق بيشادي نارنا يا دنيا لشوق بيشادي وانت بلبل اخليه oy mach yashmei yashmei وانت بلبل اخليه oy mach yashmei yashmei نارنا زمر نارنا نارنا تخور نارنا نارنا زمر نارنا نارنا تخور نارنا ايود قلبه بلبولا زيتونة إلنا وسينة ايود قلبه بلبولا زيتونة إلنا وسينة شكلالة مارلك وطالوخ چه بولنگوره دینم آترا و برنادوره چه بولنگوره دینم آترا و برنادوره چه بول جلوایه دینا حالا و برن بخمایه هیمانوتی خیلت مرزايا ويلون كخوة بالهايا بشمايا وچبو لنجورة دينا بأطرا وفرنا طورة چبو رقاده چبو چه بولنگوره دینم آترا و برنادوره چه بولنگوره دینم آترا و برنادوره چه بولدانی نسرت خمنایه صبرانوتی دیم قامایه خمرادیه دا دنیا کلا من بالجوره شما شاتایه چه بولنگوره دینم آترا و برناوره چه بولنگوره دینم آترا تیلش میلی بلبل زاری شملی تیلش میلی بلبل زاری کی ود یا شمشی دولی اصاری اصاری کی ود یا شمشی دولی اصاری اصاری لفت إيداتا خمشة قلامي لفت إيداتا خمشة قلامي يوم كروشانا تبانورامي بانورامي يوم كروشانا تبانورامي بانورامي حلالي حلالي إيدك حلالي زلالي زلالي إيدك غزالي حلالي حلالي إيدك حلالي زلالي زلالي إيدك غزالي أرخق بالكرمانة إيدك حلالي لباس من اللاشاتين إيدك خزالي أرخق بالكرمانة إيدك حلالي لباس من اللاشاتين إيدك خزالي حلالي حلالي إيدك حلالي زلالي زلالي إيدك غزالي
يشخانا مغب عبيتون باسي متغدا كاخيتا فيلوخون أمان يدعها خرزة أها إيوا أبودوت التيان تدمنتا من هدامت شتست أطورات أمريكا Assyrian Foundation of America إن بايتون شكليتون بزادة مطعنويات ين بايتون عبيتون كزبنايت سندانق Assyrian Foundation of America تبوقون ب assyrianfoundation.org هل دو خرزخينة بشواقو خنيوان بشانة
Assyrian Foundation of America was established in 1964 as a 501c3 nonprofit in California to help needy Assyrians around the world support Assyrian education and preserve and promote the Assyrian language and culture. Since 1977, Nimbe magazine has been published under the auspices of the Assyrian Foundation of America and distributed around the world. Every day since inception, Assyrian Foundation of America has been a window of hope to keep Assyria alive. For more info, please visit assyrianfoundation.org.